everyone, and welcome to the Noetic podcast. I'm your host, Jordan Cline, and I'm joined by...
CJ. Hey, guys.
And tonight, we are continuing our series on Montaigne's essays, and tonight we're going to be covering chapter 17, titled, A Characteristic of Some Ambassadors. And with that, CJ is our discussion leader, so I shall hand the mic on over to CJ.
Yeah, let's get at it. What is this characteristic of some ambassadors, right? Not all of them, just a couple. What are we dealing with? And Montaigne frames this characteristic with a story he read from a historian. And Jordan, I think you have the story better than I do, so I'll let you describe it, and then we'll try to distill what Montaigne found from that story and discuss the characteristic.
Sure. So he opens this essay with this one sort of anecdote, right? Mm-hmm. Where it's these two Frenchmen who are in Rome, and Charles V delivers this very nice speech, Montaigne says. However, the emperor sprinkles in a few insults. I think my favorite being that he wanted to fight the French king in his shirt with a sword on a bow. So with that and a couple of other jabs thrown in there, the ambassadors decide to sanitize the account and send the nicer version to the king.
Mm-hmm. And with that sanitization, we have the characteristic, right, that Montaigne points at and says, "Ooh, look at that. That was fascinating." And he discusses this idea of distorting or concealing the truth of that message, because the ambassadors could easily just have said everything.
Right, verbatim.
Mm-hmm. But they didn't. Maybe they said, well, he doesn't want to fight you in a boat, but he wants to fight you in a house. Or they could have said any other thing, but they chose to not say those things that could provoke war or could provoke any kind of intrigue that would be a deficit to the country or to their own position.
So it's an omission in arguably lying by omission.
Exactly. So what Montaigne gets from this, and I'll quote him, he says, out of this ability to distort or conceal the truth in the fear that he might take it otherwise than he should, and that being the king. And Montaigne concludes that he says, this should methinks belong to him who gives the law, and not him who receives it, to the guardian or schoolmaster. What we see is that the ambassadors take on this role of the king in some respect, or as a superior. They're not the ones that are just going to receive the information and give the information. They say, oh, wait, hold on. I know what's better for you than you do yourself, and I'm going to take some leeway, take some discretion, and move it to my advantage. Mm-hmm. And that attitude or that posture is what Montaigne wants to explore. And I'll quote him even further, where he says, we have some natural pretense to evade authority on some pretext or another, and to usurp the mastery. That we want to be the master, maybe not so much in the sense of, I want to roll over people, but I want to be known as the expert, or I want to be known as the person wearing the pants in this exchange.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, exactly. I think that how many listicles have you seen online of, here are 20 life hacks to make you an expert in anything. Mm-hmm. And I'll admit, I have clicked on many of those.
Oh, and I have
because
too.
I want to life hack everything.
Yeah, and we want to try to posture ourselves as not only experts, but I think as masters in certain things.
Definitive authorities.
Yeah, and I think Montaigne opens out this essay with this idea that people like to prefer to talk, and I'll quote him, talk about another trade than his own, thereby to acquire a new reputation. right? Like you said, I want to appear to be a master of Spanish or, of Italian, of certain languages that maybe aren't your own. Or to appear that I know charcuterie really well, better than anybody else, even though I'm actually a scientist working for NASA. Like these little things that make us seem something else than what we actually are.
Right. Yeah, I mean, even something as like ridiculous, like I'm the best at making origami frogs for my friends at the office. The best.
And you want to appear as the authority of that.
Yeah, I want to be the go-to person
because
for origami.
Because what's the difference? Like if you're not the expert, then you're subject to
someone else's authority. Right.
Yeah. So then that's maybe the dilemma that Montaigne's example story finds itself in, right? Because we have these ambassadors who take on this role of being the authority. Because if they just read off everything verbatim, then they'd just be following orders. But in some respect, they distort it and use their own discretion to the point of being the authority in that situation, right? Yeah,
so I think that we should maybe think about where it's appropriate to exercise this discretion, and then where it's sort of inappropriate to sort of go off the map.
Sure. Where do you find it appropriate, or at least where does Montaigne find it appropriate within this vein of ambassadors? Because he does keep with this idea.
Right. So I would say that it's really towards the end of the essay, right, where he says that he's heard accounts of ambassadors getting yelled at, right, for following everything to the letter. So I think that we should maybe think a little bit about, okay, in what situations would it make sense to sort of exercise these sort of liberties and to be able to take these sort of paths for maneuvering, and where Montaigne doesn't see it quite fit well.
And at the same time, he even laments the fact, I don't even know maybe what his tone is. Maybe we can discuss that even. But he takes on this idea that, well, there's this inclination for everybody, again, to be so naturally inclined to freedom and power. And he says, that to a superior nothing can be so dear as a simple and natural obedience in his servants. That we all just want to be the boss. Nobody wants to be the employee. Everybody wants to be a chief. Nobody wants to be an Indian, right? And that there is some, maybe like what you're implying, and maybe this middle ground then of rebellion and then of just being a cog is working within the authority, because then he talks about the ambassador's function.
Right.
And he says, they do not merely execute, but by their counsel form and direct the master's will.
Right.
Emphasis on the master's will. That's already there, but they have to counsel and form it in some way. And then I suppose there would be a wrong way to form it, right? Maybe you could form it in a negative connotation or a way that benefits yourself, as if you know what you're doing.
Right. I mean, think about sort of backroom deals happening that you do not to really advance the cause of your nation that you're representing, but something that potentially to line your own pockets.
So then what we're discussing here, what Montaigne is discussing, is a balance, right? But it almost seems to be a balance that rests upon the idea that there is a certain authority figure.
Right.
And that at one end is complete rebellion of trying to disattach ourselves from the authority figure. On the other end, we have an umbilical cord that in the end is just going to act as a noose around our necks.
Right.
And then at the other end, we have somebody that's working within, still has autonomy.
Parameter.
Right, but is respecting their the autonomy that they've been given.
Right. So here's a quotation that I really liked from Horace. And the lazy ox desires a saddle and bridle. The horse wants to plow. And I really like that because either way, you're still an animal. You're still bound in some sort of way. It's just a degree of separation. So everyone kind of wants to be king for a day. No one's really satisfied with their present lot, and everyone wants to seemingly trade up. But the reality is that there's always going to be a pecking order, right? There's always going to be parameters you're going to have to navigate. So as badly as you want to be that horse, and you want to like buck off your owner and like run straight back for the barn, there's then okay, if you're a bad horse, then you get sold to a new owner, and you're back in the bridle. Right,
and didn't we hear this a lot from Marcus Aurelius as well?
Yeah.
And that's somebody Montaigne would be reading and would be quite aware of, at least in the Stoic realm of thought and just as a classicist in education, just about this idea that maybe not necessarily there's a pecking order, or maybe he did believe that, but that there's this microcosm or world that we live in and that we all have a certain part and that we're not necessarily at the top of it, but we are a node in it and we are like a branch on the tree. And I think I remember his Marcus Aurelius' analogy where if you try to break yourself off from the tree and say, I'm the best, then you fall down to the floor or to the floor of the earth and you die. Right. So there is a certain thing, like you said, that there is some authority that we're calling ourselves to or that we have.
Or that we answer to.
And do you think that's maybe one of the takeaways for you? I mean, that's a big one. I don't know if there are any others.
I mean, I would say that the sort of biggest takeaways for me, at least, was just sort of stick to what you know.
Not being.
No need to sort of reinvent the wheel with things.
I think that goes back to the idea of realizing there's an authority, and perhaps it's another aspect of life, right? Because there are those things that we don't know,
right? And there's I think a tendency, especially with our society today, is to want to like specialize, specialize, and I think that becomes really enticing to want to specialize in so many different interesting, fascinating, shiny things. But I think that Montaigne kind of essentially says that the better you know something, the more eloquently and with greater brevity you can speak of something.
Yeah, and there's this great little passage from a sci-fi novel by Stanislaw Lem from his novel called The Master's Voice, and in it the character says that I'm going to butcher it, but he says specialization is ignorance that is not well-rounded, right? Where you think you know everything, you say, oh, I'm not ignorant, and I know everything. And that specialization mindset, like you said, is that idea that, oh, of course, I'm the master, that you're going to usurp that mastery, as Montaigne said. But, in effect, perhaps a well-rounded person is somebody who is okay to be the servant, right? Or who is okay to let that authority be brought to somebody else. Because that's a whole other
and just know that
universe,
like there's some sort of like realm or sphere of expertise that you probably have that others don't. So I'd say, stick to what you know. Use your discretion when your profession or trade permits some sort of latitude. But overall, just kind of respect, not the chain of command, but I guess respect your sort of niche in the ecosystem.
Can you read that Horace thing again? Because I think that sort of embodies all of that.
Yeah, I love it. The lazy ox desires a saddle and bridle. The horse wants to plow.
And that we just have those natural tendencies, and that to try to break away from those can lead to error, I suppose.
I think we just create. And I think Montaigne points to this, that we often create a lot more work for ourselves.
Oh yeah, no, that reason is a crutch, as we explored, I believe, in the previous essay from a while back on the taste of good and evil,
right?
Where he says that reason seems to be this thing that is a crutch for us, because maybe in the realm of this essay we want to have the freedom and power, and again, to break free of that saddle or
Right.
that yoke, and just to be the authority, to have the mastery. But there's limits.
Yeah, exactly. Reason has limits.
Awesome. But we don't have limits, because you can find us on SoundCloud. You can find us on YouTube. And please download that app. You can download it from Droid or iPhone on whatever store that you have on there. Thank you all so much. And
Thanks,
we'll
everyone.
talk to you soon with some more Montaigne. Have a wonderful day.
And yeah, thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next week.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.